Peter, perfect. Hi, everyone. So today we have a very, very special guest, someone that is from an organization that's super close to my heart. We have with us Marissa McNeelands, and she is amazing. She is the founder and CEO of Toast, which is a collective that helps get more women into roles in tech. And we all know that is so important in today's tech world, business world, all the worlds. So welcome, Marissa.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited to be on.
I'm so excited that you're on. I have been a Toast member for about like a little less than a year, and it has been such a great group and collective and community to be part of. We all know that we need more like-minded people to surround ourselves with, right, on a daily basis. So I'm just so glad that I found Toast and I've met you and the other amazing people that's running Toast right now.
That is so good to hear. How did you hear about Toast? How did you get involved in it in the
Oh my
first place?
gosh, I don't even remember. Like, I think a long time ago, I think it popped up on one of my social medias and it was like more women in tech. I'm like, yes, yes, join. So I just love the vibe. Like, if anyone here is listening, if you need to check out Toast, I'll talk about all that later on. But they have like the coolest branding. Like, I have to say, like, I'm a big branding nerd. Like, I love branding everything. So I just love the branding of Toast. So kudos to that. That is what got my attention right away.
Thank you. I mean, me too. I was very, very particular about how we went out into the world and the messaging that we put out because we aren't just another like women's empowerment group. We're doing a lot to really challenge the status quo and wanted to make sure that our branding reflected that.
Yeah, and like make it fun, right? Like not
Yeah.
just make it like, oh yeah, women in tech, like women in whatever, like, but it's just fun. Like I want to be part of it, right? That's the
Right?
cool part of it. Like I was like, I saw that and I was like, you know what? I want to be part of that. So
I
with
love
that.
it.
So first of all, we're talking about women in tech, right? And why I know that you're a massive advocate, obviously, for women who are underrepresented in tech. So first of all, for someone who's listening and they have no idea about like that there is an underrepresentation of women in tech, right? Let's say they don't know. So what are some stats? Like, tell me some stats on this.
Yeah, for sure. Well, we still see women graduating with university degrees and graduating from STEM programs at pretty high rates. I think it's about 59% in Canada. And yet women only represent about 20% of the tech workforce. Really what we see is women spending just under 10 years and over half of women leaving tech within their first 10 years. And really, if you look at like McKinsey does their women in the workplace
Yeah.
study every year. The one that they did last year had a little focus on women within technical roles, that women are often reporting being the only or the lonely only, as we like to call it, on their technical teams. And because of that, they're twice as likely to have their credentials questioned, their judgment questioned, experience more biases and more microaggressions in the workplace. And so ultimately what this leads to is women leaving the tech workforce. And that's really what we're trying to target and to show women that there's companies out there who are invested in gender diversity and that are great places to work. And we not only want to help amplify those companies, but we also want to give women a path to leadership and a path to influence. It's incredibly critical in order to close the gender pay gap. Like globally, tech is one of the highest paying and fastest growing industries. And if women are absent from it, we're only going to see that wage gap continue to grow.
Yeah, like a few things that you said there that sparked a few things in my head. Number one, you said there's about 59% of women
Mhm.
in tech graduating from school.
In STEM. So it's not exactly all technology programs,
Fine.
but within STEM in general. Yeah.
Okay, but that's massive. That is 59%. That's way
Mhm.
more than half, like solidly more than half of the
Mhm.
people graduating are women. And but as we go through the career pipeline, we see like people start dropping off or whatever, right? And do you think this has to do with do you think this has to do with the fact that they're not feeling welcome at a lot of the companies that they're working at?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you look at what the studies are saying is that, there are more microaggressions, more biases. I think being the lonely only does have an impact, whether that's, gender or race or any other kind of um, attribute. Being the only one on the team and having to mask in order to fit in to a culture definitely puts a weight on those people. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I started my career in engineering and I was definitely the lonely only for the quite the first little bit of my career, quite a bit, like pretty often, pretty often.
Mhm.
Like I remember that when I first joined my first school job out of university, right? There's an engineering company, and I was the only, other than the amazing admin assistant lady who was there, and she was actually like we used to call her my office mom, and she was my office. She joked me I was the office
Mhm.
daughter, whatever, right? But like she was the only other woman in the office. Like
Yeah.
legitimately, there was no other women engineers at all, and it was definitely like I could definitely feel like I was not part of the group, right? Like
Yeah,
they
for
would
sure.
go for lunch and like somehow miss forget to invite me, things like that. And and it is lonely being that. uh,
Hmm.
so I fully resonate with the lonely only comment.
For
Absolutely.
sure. Yeah. I mean, I started my career in talent acquisition and, part of that living in Alberta, I went up and worked in Fort McMurray where women are outnumbered 10 to 1 by men. And it was just like such a alarming experience for me. In my interview, I was told once I was like accepted the job, they were like, you should get a fake engagement ring if you're gonna like come up to Fort McMurray. I literally bought clothes that were like 3 times too big for me. I was in an office just like solely of men who would like talk about spending like 20K in like company expenses at the strippers. And
Right.
and I was like, just this like 22-year-old,
Yes.
like trying to just like survive and get through and like make
Yeah.
some money.
Exactly. Just get a job and start a career, right? Oh my God.
Yeah.
It reminds me of so many funny stories. I remember this one time. I also went up north to one of the
Yeah.
campsites. I don't remember if it was Fort Mac or Fort St. John, one of the same.
Hmm.
And this was like I think 2 years out of school. I'm still like,
Hmm.
no, what's happening? Like, and you're up there. It's different. It's difficult than like working downtown Calgary, downtown Toronto. Like, it's different. Very like it's
It
more
is very different.
up north at those engineering sites, those oil and gas
Yeah.
sites, right? I remember when there was just like at one point we were like in the truck and we were supposed to. I don't remember if I was doing QA, QC, something, and I was just like, "Excuse me, where's the? I need to go to the washroom. Like, where can I drive to for the women's washroom?" Right? And they just looked at me. They're like, "There is no women's washroom."
Yeah.
I was like, right? That was one thing, and I was just like, "Oh my gosh, should I just hold it?"
Yeah.
Hold it for the rest,
Yeah.
like go back to my hotel room, or like the camp room. And then another part was like I remember like in the same job where I was like first, the only woman, right? They were like, hey, you and other person, the other guy are going up to site. So like now next week you guys are gonna go. We're like, okay. And then they're like, okay, I'll book the hotel room. And then the other guy, he's like, yeah, we're booking them. So Sam had I booked the hotel room. And I kept hearing room, right? And I was just like,
Oh no.
I know. And I was just like, do you get 2 rooms? Like one for you, one for me? Like, I just wanted to like sort of, make sure that we're on that page. And he's like, no, I just got one room that's gonna have 2 beds. And I was like, okay, buddy, like,
No, not happening.
no, that's not, it's just inappropriate at that point.
Yeah.
Oh, but we don't have budget for 2 rooms. I'm like, well, in that case, I guess I'm going by myself or you're going with another dude. Like, it's things like this. Like, how do you not even think about the fact that there's
Hmm.
another, yeah, whew, like that. It's stuff like that. My God. Like thankfully all that was like a long time ago, but
Yeah.
it's a bit terrifying.
It is for sure. Yeah. But I mean, I think like those experiences kind of built something in me and having to like really like advocate for myself, you have to like speak up or else you're in like an unsafe environment.
Oh,
Um, but I think it also like translates into tech. Like if
yeah.
we look women make up 51% of the population, but are incredibly underrepresented on the teams that are building digital products. And so you get models trained on data that do not have women, representing them. And then we're just creating these models that are like making decisions for us and amplifying biases within data sets, all because there was no woman on that team to be like, hey, I'm not represented in this data.
So interesting. So interesting. I keep thinking of all these things. So this past weekend, I went to collect my car, a new car. Okay, so I have my lease was over for a car, so I'm getting a new car. I'm like, great. I got in the car and I was telling the guy, the sales guy, he's almost like a friend of mine now because like we've been talking a lot. He's great. And I was like, you know what? You guys need like whoever designs these cars, someone didn't consult a woman on the team because I would love a place to put my purse as soon as I get in the car, right? So I'm like, clearly this car was, I love the car that I'm picking up. I love it. Everything is great. But I'm just kind of like funny in a tongue-in-cheek way is telling him, I wish a woman designed that then know where to put my purse, right? I'm not talking about a big work bag, just a purse. Just put it somewhere, not in the second seat or whatever. And he's like, actually, you know what? The other model, the UX model or whatever, that one was actually designed by a woman. And you know what? It actually is a spot for a purse. This one was not.
Yeah.
I was like, so that's exactly, I'm like, exactly what you just said, right? Like all of these things, whether it's tech or product making products, anything like that, right? If you're not having women on the decision-making team, on the design team, they're not made for women. Like it doesn't fulfill the ticks all the boxes that a woman wants in that product, right? Whether it's a car or a piece of technology or AI model or LLM model, whatever it is.
Exactly.
So that is the biggest selling point for getting more women into tech or any of these
For
roles.
sure. Yeah, we need women in the seats making the decisions.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so now that we talked about why it is so important, do you like what other than your Fort Mac journey where you went and you were like, okay, there's just not enough women in tech. Are there anything else that happened along your journey that made you become such a strong advocate for women in tech?
Yeah. So as I said, I was working in talent acquisition when I went up to Fort McMurray and continued my career in talent acquisition. I made a mid-career shift.
Yeah.
And that was because someone within my organization kind of tapped me on the shoulder and was like, hey, we're going to start building software in-house. That was back in like 2015 when not a lot of companies were doing that. Have you ever thought about product management? And I was literally like, what is a product manager? Like no idea what like product management was, what like agile software development. I was put on like a corporate lending product, had no idea. But I think like now looking back, there's a lot of things that I think one, companies that upskill an existing workforce gets more diversity within that workforce. And then two, I think there's a lot of innate abilities outside of being technical that, I had to lean on. I was a relationship builder. I would ask the right questions. I was curious. I came in, I always say I was a better product manager when I knew absolutely nothing than what I am now, almost 10 years in, because I went in with an absolute beginner mindset and was like, teach me, tell me, what are the things, and I could dream big and rally a team and have a vision. And so I had an incredibly great product experience or sorry, first experience into tech. But as I went further and further along and kind of climbed the ladder, got deeper into data and AI products, I started realizing that there were fewer and fewer women around me. When I was leading conversational AI products, I wanted to hire a senior product manager, and the recruiter was only giving me resumes of men. When I went back to her and was like, hey, we're building a product here for 100% of the population, like we are a retail bank, we need, at that time, our entire team was men, not a single woman. And so I was like, I need at least 50% of this data set to be women in order to make a decision on this. Like, I'm not saying I'm going to only hire a woman, but I need this to be representative of the communities in which we serve. right?
That.
And she was basically like, well, no, women are applying, and it wasn't seen as like a business problem. Really wasn't like wasn't anything that the team wanted to put effort into, didn't really see it as a problem. And so I basically like went home that day and was like, I need to build something that is going to be an easy way for companies to hire more women onto their tech teams. And basically just like sat down and got to work and started like typing out a business plan. And ultimately that's like how Toast was born.
That's amazing. And
Yeah.
how you said like you want to make an easier way for companies to see the value for having more women in tech and then how get them into the roles,
Mhm.
right? So right now are companies kind of seeing the value of having more women in tech? Are they kind of still seeing it like, oh, it's kind of like a DEI initiative? Like, yes, we need more women, but that sometimes you ask them and they can't really tell you why that is the case,
Mhm.
right? Has it changed a little bit?
I would say companies definitely see the value of having more women in tech. Um, I would say where the tricky part is like how to get there, because I mean the definition of insanity is doing the same thing and expecting different results. And so I think we are still as a like society holding on to a very outdated idea of how to recruit and how we hire. But it's worked so far. It's worked to get a lot of the same type of person in the door and onto these teams, but there's no really like urgency or hunger to change that. And so I think ultimately, like we thought when I brought when April came onto the team, we were like, we're going to build out this membership community and we're going to take 6 months and build that out. And then we're going to go to organizations and start being like, look, try to sell them and be like, we have all these like women in our pool and like we want you to hire them. But realistically, we had 5 companies signed before we ever launched our membership. And so I think that really speaks to the fact that there is a need out there
Mhm.
from companies. Um, I think ultimately, if a company is like sees the value in it and also understands that they have a problem, that's usually the sweet spot for us to be able to come in is like admitting you have a problem, admitting your processes are broken, and trying to like reach out for a solution to fix that. And that's really where Toast comes in and can help organizations.
Yeah. And that is like, I think that is even like one part of the battle is like getting them in, right?
Yeah.
But then like I've also spoken to people, right? Like, and I'm, obviously one of the people, you're one of the people, we're all one of the peoples, right? Where while we're in a company, right? Like there's also some other barriers we face too, like as women in some like male dominated like professions and sectors and groups and teams, right? There's like imposter syndrome, there's like tall poppy syndrome, there's all kinds of different things that pop up. What are you seeing and that is actually like the barrier to like having people stay in the industry for a long time,
Yeah. And
right?
there's a broken rung, right? You're like climbing the ladder and then all of a sudden the rung's broken. You like can't get up to that next level. Um, and we see this so much. And I mean, at Toast, we focus very much on the hiring. We know that we can't do absolutely everything. We know that we can't save the world. We wish we could. Um, and so we focus on hiring. And really, actually, I think April shared a couple months ago in the Toast Slack channel, um, an HBR article about having that like second hire. Because really, if you're hiring one woman, I think it takes someone like very special to be that like one woman on the team and to like be the first and to get in there. And you'll need a lot of like grit and resilience. But once you have that second hire, that's when you start to like really see the magic happening. Um, and so it's always kind of like balancing that where we're like we want companies to be gender diverse, but it's a stepping stone, right? We're like slowly getting there. But yeah, I mean we talk about it, which is why we launched our champions program, is because we see that women have more mentors than men, but men have more influential mentors within an organization. We also see this like big burden put on women in leadership who are often in tech, just like 10% of women being in leadership, above that like director and up level. And so we're putting all this burden on them to mentor all the women trying to get into tech or trying to get up that rung. And so really the approach that we're taking is we need men involved. We need the other 80 to 90% of leadership. And really when we looked and started going out into our networks and being like, we need tech executives to like come in and we're going to train them and we're going to teach them how to use their power and influence and networks to lift women up and through into leadership roles. We started seeing that majority of them were men. And ultimately, like we just need to get them to a place where they are like comfortable enough, knowledgeable enough, and have understanding of the barriers that women face in the workforce,
Yeah.
to be able to like coach them through that and get competitive on their behalf.
Exactly. And allies are so important, right? And when we were talked about like, oh, there are all these like these workplaces didn't have enough women, whatever. I don't think it's intentional either, right? It's not intentional. A lot of men are very well intentioned. They want to help. They realize it, right? Like I think some of the people in my career who was like kind of taking a chance on me or kind of championed me a little bit has been men actually in the past, right? Probably because the 90% of the people that I work with were men. So the
Yeah.
chance is statistically it would be a man, but but they
Mhm.
have been, right? So they do see the value of it, but maybe they do need more help to be like, okay, now that you've kind of taken the first step as to champion a woman, help a woman, right? Like get to the next level. Now, how can you sustain that? How can you continue to do that, right?
Mhm.
So I know
And
that you and April had mentioned you've mentioned this thing that's really cool, which is that women are typically over mentored and under sponsored,
mhm.
which I think is such a great concept, right? So can you tell me about that? Like, what does under sponsored mean, and what's the value of sponsorship in an organization?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think we see so many mentorship programs, and I think a lot of people have a lot of mentors, which are there, to give advice, to help you work through issues, and I think they definitely play a role. But I mean, what we've heard of so much is that, the people that you're being mentored by, often other women who are, struggling to survive in their leadership role and responsible for 95% of unpaid labor in the
Yeah,
world, and then you're adding the burden of having to mentor. But as I said, the stat before, like women usually have more mentors than men do. So women are like seeking out mentorship and trying to build their like personal
yeah,
board of directors, but
yeah,
they aren't as influential. And so really what we need from sponsors is to be able to take tangible action and to use the influence that they have, the power that they have, the roles where they are to be able to speak for the women who are not yet at the table or are not yet in those rooms
yeah.
to ensure that they are creating opportunities for them.
Yeah, that's so important. And I want to pick on something that you mentioned, you just said right now. And that's something that I have been trying to do and I have not been successful. And I think a lot of people may not have even heard of it. So you mentioned the personal board of directors, right? So
Mhm,
I'm sure half the people listening to the podcast have never heard of what that is, right? So
mhm.
what is that?
Yeah, I will say this is like all my co-founder April. This is kind
Okay.
of the term that she's coined throughout her career is like who are the people that you need around you to like give you that advice, to be able to bounce ideas off, to be able to talk through
Yeah.
those tough situations. If you think of like yourself as a company, usually a company would have a board of directors that is overlooking things and making sure you're keeping on the right track. Think of, your career as the same thing, and who are the people that you need with diverse perspectives, who are going to challenge you, and who are going to challenge the way that you think. And that's often not just one person. That's often multiple people who really like bring different perspectives and different experiences to you.
And how do we build that? Like, if I'm like, yeah, that sounds amazing. I, Sabahat, would love to have a personal board of directors of like 3 to 4 people. Like, how do I build that?
I mean, it's all about relationships. It's
Yeah.
all about like getting out there, building relationships with people. I think no matter where you are, at least in Canada, the ecosystem is so, so small. So if you are in tech or trying to get into tech in Canada, you need to be out at events and you need to have your face seen, you need to have your voice heard. And once you start putting that out and putting yourself out there, you're going to attract these people in. But it's also an effort of like continuously building those relationships with people and ensuring that you are giving as much as you're taking.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I think that you're so right. I think like relationships, networking comes to that, right? You don't want to just go and network when you're looking for a job, right? Like that
Yeah.
never works. Then now I'm networking. I meet people all the time at these events, right? And I meet them and they're like, yeah, I'm looking for a job, and I'm like, okay, great. And then I tell them like, well, keep showing up to these events, like keep talking to people,
Mhm.
keep making relationships, have people come out for coffee, things like that, right? Because it's when you're not actually looking for an outcome, that's when something actually like materializes.
Exactly. And like think about, I mean, in this market too, right now, it's tough. And like you need to be building relationships so that 6 months down the line, or like however long, when the market rebounds or when that company is hiring, they're thinking of you first, because not only they met you at that one event or you like reached out on LinkedIn and asked for a job. Don't do that.
No.
Instead it's like, oh, that was a person who like took an interest in me, or like, offered to help me out and do something to help me in my business or my career or whatever. And then when things open up, you're like, okay, that's the person that I want in.
Yeah, networking is basically the long game.
It is, but it works. It's like it sucks. I mean, myself as an introvert, I I hate it, but I know that it, like, even as like building a business, it's like so necessary to like be at the events and show my face and talk to the right people. And like if you think of yourself, and in your career hunt as like you building a company and you're trying to like get clients and get revenue, it's the same kind of
Yeah.
thing. Your client is the company and your revenue is your salary. And so like, where do you need to be in order to get visibility?
Totally. And the introvert thing that you said is interesting because I, for example, identify mostly as an extrovert, right? And maybe I'm not extreme extrovert, just a bit more on the extrovert side, right? But for me, for example, I can go to an event and be like, I made 4 connections, right? For introvert, I always say that uh, you don't have to like, talk to 10 people, like talk to like 2 or 3,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah,
that's
for
it.
sure.
Like, just for you, you don't have to like focus on quantity, just focus on quality. It's like you
Yeah,
can make one good connection, that's great, right? Just maintain
definitely.
that.
Yeah, I remember, oh, this was probably a year ago. And there was this like kind of influencer event, kind of like PR thing in Toronto. And April was like, you have to go to this. You have to go. And I got like one ticket. We got one ticket. And so I like literally went by myself, knew no one. And I would like go up to groups of people and be like, hi, can I like stand with you? But I was like there to literally meet one person. And I was like, this is my mission, is like I have to go meet this one person, this
That's
like particular person. But I was like literally like in the bathroom, like sweating. I
yeah,
was just like sweating so hard. I was so nervous. And I'm
yeah.
like texting April and I'm like, you owe me one. Like
Gotta hype yourself. I'm like, how
stabbing.
can I? Yeah, you're like, never again, never again.
And I like went up to someone and I was like, "Hey, do you know this person?" And they're like, "Yeah, I'll intro to you." And I like got an intro, like made the connection, was like, hey, that was like step one, I'm out of there. I was like,
My
never,
God.
never doing that again. But then it was like, then the second time I had to go back to event, I was like, okay, I already know this one person and I know that person who introduced me to them. And so it was like a little bit easier. And so I was like, hey, I'm going to show up. I'm going to show up to all of these things. And I'm like going and I get like a little bit more confident every single time. But man, that first one was like, that was awful.
And
It's awful. My nightmare.
still get PTSD from it. You're like,
Yeah, I do.
and you know what? Like you can go to like a million networking events, but I feel like you always get that bit of like, like it's not like over. You're not like, okay, now like I'm Marissa, I've gone to like 8 of them now this year, so now it's piece of cake. I'm not anxious anymore. It will be. It's normal to go into a room of people you don't know, right?
Yeah. And I mean, if you can bring a friend. But like for me, I was like new to Toronto and I was like literally know 0 people in this ecosystem. And it was just like I had to go to things and like see the same face like 3 times,
Yeah.
So I'd be like, okay, on the 3rd time, I know that person.
Yeah.
And like it was just like consistency and like, then people are like, oh, she's at the things that I'm at. So like,
Exactly. And then, hey, how's it going? Right?
Yeah,
Like you might not need to be friends with them, but just having seen a familiar face.
exactly.
Oh, hey, how's it going? That just
Yeah.
makes you brings a sigh of relief. You're like,
Mhm.
like I can now breathe again. I'm not like it's not like a room full of like 80 people I've never met, right?
Yeah,
But
exactly.
it's interesting.
Yeah.
I myself, like I said, since I'm on the extrovert side, like I don't really mind it. I think when I was in Toronto once, I was just visiting through Toronto and they were having a toast event. I'm like, yeah, I'll show up. So when I'm like, I don't know anybody, but cool. It was like a bingo game. And I'm like, perfect. I can talk to 30 people to like do these boxes. And I was like, at the end, I was tired, but I was still pretty good. I'm like, I talked to so many people. This is great. But I can imagine how for an introvert, that would be a nightmare.
Yeah.
Like that
Yeah.
would be a nightmare. But you know what I loved also, another tip for, I think, internet for networking for introverts, is when you said like you went with a mission to meet one person,
Yeah.
that really helps. If someone goes and saying, I'm gonna meet this person so and so, like that way you're like, okay, I have a purpose. I
I
have
have a goal.
a
Oh,
goal.
for sure. Otherwise, I will like freeze up and like
Yeah.
stand in a corner. And I'm
Yes.
like, I don't know why I'm here. And then I'll stay there for like 10 minutes and go. I'll like eat some food and like awkwardly. And then I'm like, that was a waste of my time. But I like have to have a goal when I'm going in.
I think that's such a good tip for networking for anybody, extroverts, introverts, any kind of person, right? But that having a goal helps a lot. Even if you're like, well, I don't have a goal, but just like kind of like before the event, if you like go through who's going to be there a little bit, or what is the event, what kind of people are going to be there, what is my objective? Let me say, I want to meet one person who works at Google. I don't
Exactly. Yeah.
know. It.
Yeah, but it is. And sometimes I'm like, hey, I need to talk to, even at like some toast events, I'm like, I want to talk to this
Yeah.
one person, or you can't get to everyone, but if you don't have a goal, you're probably
Yeah.
gonna.
That way you never feel like, why, what am I doing here? Why am I here?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
I'm gonna
Exactly.
just go. Yeah. It's so funny. I feel like sometimes some of my most interesting stories have been like when I just gone into a place to just for some kind of event that I've known nobody. Like it's actually
Mhm.
happened. Another thing in Toronto happened. Actually, a funny story is well, there was my master's school, the school where I did my master, my MBA. They have an alumni chapter in Toronto. So like I had joined that group on WhatsApp. I'm like, yeah, I'm sometimes in Toronto too. Like whenever you have an event, invite me. I know it's like an introvert's nightmare, right? But like, invite me to all the things all over the country, right? So they had an alumni event and I went to it, right? I'm like, I've never met any of the people in Toronto, but let's just go. I'll just make some new friends, whatever. So went to this, what I thought was the venue. I go there and there's all these people in these like black suits. Okay,
Oh
so
no.
many people. I'm like, wow, the alumni chapter in Toronto are like very formal. Okay, cool. Right. This is like IE business school, right? Very formal. And I go and I'm like wearing a little more dressed and I'm wearing a blazer too, but it's like a sky blue blazer or whatever, like a powder blue. It's
Yeah.
no, it's more chill, right? Like
Yeah,
these
for
people are
sure.
all like they look like they work in investment banking or
Yeah.
something. I'm like, or like law. And I'm like, okay, well, so I'm trying to talk to this person. I'm like, hey, how's it going? Whatever. And then they're like, yeah, we're here because of this acquisition of this thing for that thing. I'm like, okay. Now I'm like, have you seen blah, blah, blah? Like this person who was organizing. And they're like, oh no, I haven't. I don't really know who that is. I'm like, okay, well, I'll talk to somebody else. Maybe there's so many people here. So I was talking, and then I like bumped into this other guy who was like, are you like looking for some of the people from the like the IE alumni group? I'm like, yeah. And anyway, then we were both a bit confused, like, what's happening? And then we talked to a few more groups of people. Turns out we're at the wrong venue altogether. So we had
Oh,
the whole
no.
like half an hour eating their food, drinking their wine, and we're just like, we're the wrong place. So we just like, it was hilarious. We just like ran out of there. We're like, ha ha ha. We texted like, where exactly are you guys? Turned out it was right next door. But this venue was just another, we just joke, like we just crashed another networking event. From
Yeah.
but
Well, if you ever need an M&A lawyer, you probably have a few in your Rolodex now.
there you go. Lots of M&A lawyers, real estate lawyers that I've now made connections with in Toronto.
There you go. Yeah, in Toronto.
Oh my God, too funny. But yeah, I think networking is so important, and I think so many people struggle with this. So I think hopefully some of these tips were useful. But
Yeah.
I want to talk a little bit more about like advocacy, being allies,
Mm.
like allyship, right? Right now, there is just I think there's allies for being allies for women, right? But there's also women of color. There's other identities that people have, right? So intersectionality is so important, I feel. Instead of just being an ally for women in tech or just whatever it is, right? Women in business or leadership, right?
Mhm.
So do you think that that is also part of your viewpoints and outlook and your mission as well, like intersectionality?
Definitely. I think intersectionality, I mean, when we like take a step back and look at, I mean, we even talked about this in our champions training.
Yeah.
But if you take a step back and look at the things that like impact how someone shows up, I mean, in our case, what we talk about is how someone shows up at work. And, there's so many things, including like generational attributes, societal attributes. And then we also get into like the dominant culture within our society, which is like white supremacy culture. And there's so many attributes that are just so ingrained within our society, that we need to like stop and look at and be able to understand the background and the experiences that everyone brings to the table and understand how to treat those, not treat them, but how to kind
Navigate
of
them.
make space, how to navigate them and how to make space for
Yep.
everyone. And
Yes.
I think oftentimes, I mean, one of the reasons for like our messaging and our brand at Toast is because a lot of the like other, women's groups that I've been part of have been very focused on like how to fit into a corporate mold. And so within corporate, I always say it's a box. And does your resume check off everything in the box? Do you how well do you fit into the box? And in my experience, it was always like, let's teach you how to fit into the box rather than how do we expand our definition of that box, and how do we ensure that kind of everyone can contribute, and can kind of thrive and collaborate together, within an environment. And I think we do that by breaking down some of these like power structures and like white supremacy attributes that hold up our society. I mean, ultimately, we kind of, April and I live and die by a quote that we heard from Jake Stitka, who runs Next Gen Men in Calgary, which is allyship should cost you something. And I think it's a different way of looking at it. I think a lot of times, as I mean, especially as like white women, um, people are so reluctant to like speak up on issues or to support other people because they think they think that they're losing out on something or it's going to be a detriment to them. And instead of looking at it that way, I think we look at it as allyship needs to cost you something, whether that's time, whether that's money, some sort of resources, in
Mhm.
order to be a true ally, you need to be giving something up. And that can be very easy things, such as, if I'm asked to be on a panel that is all white people, I will step aside and give my seat to a woman of color. That's something easy that I can do. I'm losing visibility of being on that panel. But I think it's a spectrum. And I think when we look at like, your risk tolerance um, for everyone looks a little bit different. But I think if we think of like truly supporting and being good allies, we need to understand that we are it's our duty to lose something in the process.
And during this, we've been through a weird space in the last 6 months for whatever's happening in the world, right? I remember there's some people that I've spoken to who are, um, identify as white, men, women, whatever, right? And I think I've actually heard some people say that like, oh, I don't want to speak out on it because I have friends I'm going to offend. I don't want to offend my friends. I don't want to offend the people I know. They're all good people. I don't want to offend them. I don't want to make them like hate me, right? So that just so when you said allyship should cost you something, need to cost you something, that just reminded me of that. And it just
Yeah,
it's a bit of a sad space to be in when you're like, oh, if I speak up, then I'm going to lose a friend,
for
right?
sure. For
How-
sure. I think there's a lot of fear of reprisal right now, and I do think it's warranted. But I, because of power structures,
Yeah,
because of
exactly. Yeah.
the society that we're built on. But I also think you need to look at both sides. And I made a LinkedIn post this
Which I
week that
love.
kind of, thank
Oh,
you, that kind of called people to
yeah.
speak out, because what is the alternative? And I will say, this week we were like, we're going to brace for impact.
Mhm.
um and we have had probably 100 times more positive messages like sent our way than what we were expecting, than negative messages. We've definitely had the negative ones, but it was like, if you're prepared for that and if you're prepared to lose something, um it makes it much easier. And if you think about like, what's the alternative to this? And like, for us, it was like, we stay silent, we stay complicit in, a lot of people dying.
Yeah.
And I mean, instead of taking action and using our voices and using our platform.
And keeping those power struggles like status quo, right? Like
Exactly.
power
Exactly.
dynamics exactly how it is. That's the other side too. Like you don't change anything in the world, right? And
Yep.
honestly, that viewpoint that you guys have, like I have so much respect for that. So thank you for not just saying it, but also living it. So I absolutely admire that.
Of course. Yes.
Also, when when you were talking about how like being put in a box, so far everything in corporate has been about being put in a box. Um,
Hmm.
I resonate with that so much because that's kind of why I started this podcast, Bold Hearted. Because for me, it was like, well, I have never resonated with being put in a box. Like, if you try to put me in a box, I have a physical allergic reaction to it. I'm like, ah. So I'm like, I'm sure there's other people too who have that, right? So let's like talk about things like that, like have people like that on the podcast, and people who I call bold hearted, right? So that's what my definition of bold hearted is: people who don't want to fit in a box. They don't want to. They don't want to just follow the status quo. They just want to blaze their own trail. But what does bold hearted mean to you?
Yeah. I think, to me, and like starting my own business, I think there's a definition, or like what you imagine when you think of like a business person, or and like profits and growth and above everything else. But um to me, I think the most freeing thing in starting Toast has been being able to live in congruency with my core values. And that sounds like such a like cheesy thing, like, oh, I get to live in congruency with my core values by like Brene Brown. Um, but I think
It's
that,
true. It's so true though.
right, we talk about like values and I'm like, oh, um,
But you say it, but you don't actually live it. You're like, oh yeah, my values, but actually, you're
yeah.
like, well, yeah, leave the
But
room.
that's always right. That's always how it is in corporate. It's like, here's our core values. And I'm like, no, like that's your core values. That's not really mine. But like for me, my core value has always been doing the right thing. And so being able to like live my life authentically and run a business you know, authentically, and to be able to like make both like business and personal decisions through the lens of like, you know, how do I want to be like remembered, or what side of history do I want to be on, or you know, if I were on the other side, like how would I want to be treated? And so I really think that like being bold-hearted is having the courage to live authentically in your values.
I love that. That is very, very close to my core values too. So perfect. Okay, so I think that let's start wrapping up our conversation. I want to ask you, um,
Mhm.
as a last advice, if you want to, or last piece of wisdom or whatever you want to give to people listening, what would you say to people who say, yeah, I want to live bold-heartedly. I want to blaze my own trail, but maybe they're not, or they are, but what would you tell them?
Yeah. I think that the only person that can make a change in your life is you. And as I said, I think everyone has a different risk tolerance, and everyone can kind of go about making a change and living true to who you are and authentically in different ways. For some people, that can be, you know, being loud and proud. And for other people, that can be taking what I call like the Trojan horse method, you know? But I think that if you want to live bold-heartedly, you have to kind of take that first step. And oftentimes that's using your voice, even when it's scary and even when there are repercussions.
Yeah, I love that so much. This was such a great conversation, Marissa. If people want to find you now, they're like, wow, I love listening to Marissa. Where can they find you? Where can they find Toast?
Yeah, go to trytoast.community. You'll find everything about how to work with us if you're an organization looking to hire more women in tech, or if you're a woman in tech looking for a community. We're at trytoast.community, or you can find me on LinkedIn.
Awesome. And I will link Marissa's not contact, but LinkedIn page on the show notes as well. So everyone can find you easily, and as well as the Toast website as well. So
Yeah,
thank you so much, Marissa. This was such a fantastic conversation. I
it
love
was.
I love it. It was a fantastic, bold-hearted conversation. Like I love how we talked about all the things about how to courage, to sort of live your core values, how to look at being an ally and all of the things in corporate and how we can overcome that and get more women in tech. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me.